Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and theologian in residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish, one Christian.
This week, we're reading the story of God's promise to Abraham as told in Genesis 15, 1-21. When Abraham expresses anxiety about the future, God shows him the stars as a sign of the good things to come. So too, we think, the signs of God's promises are all around us, if only we can step outside of our small worlds to see them. Yet this text also speaks of promises delayed, of generations passing before God's promises will be fulfilled. In times when things feel hopeless, this text invites us to trust in God rather than being overwhelmed by our present circumstances. God receives Abraham's trust and reckons it as righteousness. Perhaps God will do the same for us. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, it's Bible Worm time.
I know it!
You have a little bug friend with you today.
Yeah, I do. He's like actually a very big bug. Like I think he has muscles on his bug legs. Bigger muscles than my own biceps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But he is safely encased in a plastic cup right now, and I will deal with him after
Bible
this
Worm.
recording session. But he's so big, I keep looking over to make sure he can't tip over the
He
cup.
hasn't moved the cup. There's a How I Met Your Mother episode in which there's a cockamouse. Do you ever watch How I Met Your Mother?
No.
It's a cockamouse. It's like they can't decide whether it's a cockroach or a mouse, and then they finally decided it's a hybrid of the two. So
That's terrifying.
it is very terrifying, and it can fly. And so your bug is sort of like that.
It
but
is.
maybe less terrifying. Mhm.
Yeah. If it tips over the cup, I apologize.
Then
in
Bible Worm
advance
is
for
over. If the Bible Worm is very
the
short
Bible
today, it
Worm
means-
episode is over.
Yeah.
Amy has left the building.
Well, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. The trio that I sing with has a very, for us, big concert in a week and a day. So I feel like I'm using every moment that I'm not like working or Bible worming or getting my son ready for college to cram a lot of songs into my tiny little brain.
Yeah, it's not just a big deal for you guys. Like you're playing at one of the premier venues.
It's a
in
real,
the world.
yeah, it's a real
Not really in the
place.
world.
It's not, we're
It's a real
not like
place, yeah.
singing in a random backyard. Where it's like a real place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so exciting. So much excitement.
Yeah. That's what's new with me. What's new
Yeah.
with you?
Nothing so exciting as that. I just got back from a retreat in Colorado where I was talking to people about the narrative lectionary, which is what I seem to do these days. And it was really fun. Read with a whole bunch of really great pastors, and it was invigorating for me. When I left, I was in Denver. Well, I was in Estes Park, Colorado. And it was like, I don't know, maybe 50 degrees when I woke up yesterday morning. And now I'm back in Little Rock. And it's like, it's going to be 100 today. It's already like
Oof.
in the 80s, and it's just in the morning. Like I'm walking my kid to school this morning. I'm like, oh my
Like,
goodness.
oh, this is a little warm.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so it was the last little gasp of summer, and now I'm back. Things are starting up here at Hendrix, and we're off. We're on. We're
Off to the races.
We're off to the races. We're on to the next thing. We are. Yeah.
We are.
Well, Amy, in our narrative lectionary reading, we are also off to the races because last week it was creation time, and now we're in Genesis 15
Yeah.
with the story of Abram. I'm just going to say up front, I'm very likely to refer to Abram as Abraham almost exclusively because I have he has a name change in the next chapter or two.
Yeah.
but I have a very hard time calling him Abram. Or
Yeah,
you're going to probably say Avram. Yeah.
Yeah,
But anyhow.
it's hard because we all know him as Abraham, and he's not yet, but he will be. So,
He will be shortly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Amy, I don't think we probably need to rehearse everything that happens between Genesis 3 and Genesis 15, but it does seem like in order to make sense of what's happening in this text, there's probably at least a little bit we should know. Like, for instance, who is Abraham?
Yeah.
So, would you want to fill us in a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. Just a quick overview of what we have been through in the biblical text. So there are numerous stories, numerous examples between Genesis 3 and Genesis 15 when we'll pick up that sort of repeatedly seem to convey that humans are not just going to do the easy thing that God had in mind for them to do. They're going to do something else.
Yeah.
We already read the Garden of Eden story. There's Cain and Abel. There's the Tower of Babel, and most famously, the flood, which is actually even before the Tower of Babel. God is trying to make this work, and then finally, decides I just can't. These people are a disaster, and maybe that was a little over. Well, no, I think that is actually what God feels at that.
Pretty much God literally says something like that in Genesis 6, right?
Yeah. So instead of just saying, forget about this whole creation thing, God, it's almost like starts over again and says, okay, I'm going to focus on a much more narrow sort of lineage through humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And that winds up being the lineage of Avram, who I'll talk about more in a minute. But I want to make very clear that even through that narrower lineage, it is always the intention that that particular focused relationship will be a blessing for all people.
Yes.
So it's really not, this is not like a rejection of other people or peoples. It is God's taking a different approach.
Right.
To try to bring blessing to the whole world. So
I think that part of what you're saying there is so important. And it's, that blessing in chapter 12 where God first meets Abram.
Mm-hmm.
In verse 3, all the families of the earth will be blessed because of you. And so that, I love the way you said that, not blessed over and against other people, but blessed on behalf of other people so that that blessing will ripple out. That's so hard to kind of, it's actually not that hard to get your head around, but I think it's easy to forget that is the way that this promise is given.
Yeah.
Anyway, I interrupted you. Back to
No.
the
So
intro.
and the way you just said that was making me think about that teaching that, we have these, as humans, these big aspirations to heal the world and make everything better. And really often the best thing we can do is start with one thing. Start with something that's close to you. Start even with yourself. Start with your immediate neighbor. But you have to trust that really your investment of love there is going to...
Oh, I love that.
Is going to really spill out all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, you mentioned Genesis 12 is where we really start to hear about Avram. He's introduced in the chapter before, just at the end of a lineage. It doesn't really seem like there's anything super special about him.
Yeah.
It tells us that his father and his brothers and his nephew, they start a journey towards Canaan together from Ur of the Chaldees, where they were from. Most of the group stops partway through, but Avram and his wife Sarai is her name at the time, and Lot, his nephew, eventually will continue on because Avram gets this crazy call, go forth to the land that I will show you, and he does it.
Yeah.
So why it is Avram who gets the call, the text doesn't tell us, but he does it.
Yeah, it's not entirely clear why God chooses Abram, and it's also not entirely clear why Abram responds to God in the first place in chapter 12. But they both do in a sort of interesting, there's no real reason for it, but it's just the way that it is.
It's just the way that it is. And then in the next couple of chapters between 12 and 15, this little family encounters various challenges. There's a famine. There's a moment when Sarai is presented as an unmarried woman, and it seems like maybe she's being taken into a king's harem or something like that. But they are always able to emerge unscathed with God's help. Avram seems to acquire a lot of wealth and power. He seems to, when his nephew Lot is in trouble, he's able to kind of marshal an army to go rescue him, which is unusual and pretty great. He and Lot split off from each other, so they're not competing for resources. And I think that's about where we are when we get into chapter 15. Is there anything else, any other salient thing you would want to add in there?
No, that was a great introduction to this text. You were mentioning the story where Avram convinces the Egyptians that, well, I mean, she is his half-sister, so he's not lying, but he gives Sarai
he's not
to the
lying,
Pharaoh.
but it's so misleading.
I know. And so this just reminded me that one of the Bible Worm collaborative people was asking me why we want to lift up Avram when he's the kind of guy who trades off his wife as his sister to another man to protect his own butt. And I did not have a great answer for that. And so I'm wondering if you have a great answer for that.
So they're asking us to speak on behalf of the narrative lectionary or speak on behalf of our traditions of why Avram is
I mean, I think it was deeper than the narrative lectionary. I think it was like
our traditions.
Biblically.
Yeah.
Why do we celebrate this guy when he has this kind of capacity to treat his wife this way?
I mean, my at least quick answer is all of the quote unquote heroes or patriarchs and many of the matriarchs in the story, like they are flawed people. Like Moses isn't perfect. Sarah is not perfect. Avram is not perfect. So I think that we need to be cautious not to hold them up as like we should always behave just like these people do. And, you know, as I say sometimes when I see something in the text that upsets me, I try to look around for where it's actually happening or where I'm doing something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think of them as heroes in that way. They're not models of the perfect human life to me. They're honest. And I do not like that. That was a real move of cowardice and selfishness, I think, for Avram to put Sarai in that position.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And I think your emphasis there that, you know, these characters are not necessarily, or in this case, not to be lifted up as moral exemplars, at least in every instance, but they are real complicated human beings whom we were just talking about. God chooses anyway, not because Avram is the, you know, most perfect person who ever lived, but because he's the guy that God decides to choose. And I like that, you know, in all our human complexity, we also can be part of this ongoing story. We don't have to be perfect exemplars ourselves. All right. So the narrative lectionary for today is Genesis 15, 1-6. Because we are who we are, we've decided just to read all of Genesis 15 because it's a really interesting text. And so we're going to read 15, 1-21.
1-6 is so short.
It's very short. Yeah, it's partly like I don't know how to talk about that for an hour.
Okay.
Although it's amazing how long we can talk about things. Like, I mean, we're 15 minutes in now and we're not even to the text yet. Like, you and I can do some talking.
I had to describe the bug. Yeah.
Yeah. So 15, 1-6. And but we're going to do 15, 1-21. But we'll linger over 1-6 for just a little while. So I'm just going to start there. Are we ready to go?
I'm ready.
So I am reading in the Common English Bible. After these events, the Lord's word came to Abram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your protector. Your reward will be very great. But Abram said, Lord God, what can you possibly give me since I still have no children? The head of my household is Eliezer, a man from Damascus. He continued, since you haven't given me any children, the head of my household will be my heir. The Lord's word came immediately to him. This man will not be your heir. Your heir will definitely be your very own biological child. Then he brought Abram outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars if you think you can count them. He continued, This is how many children you will have. Abram trusted the Lord, and the Lord recognized Abram's high moral character. Okay, there are a couple of translational issues in there with the CEB that I'm going to want to talk about, but let's just start in the beginning of this text. God shows up just telling Abraham, "Don't be afraid." Do you have any sense of why God enters into the scene at this moment?
It's such a good question because it doesn't seem like Avram was particularly afraid,
Right.
although he has been in dangerous situations over the past couple of chapters.
It's
So
true.
I suppose it could just be sort of an ongoing affirmation. Don't be afraid. But it does feel a little abrupt to me. I don't know.
I kind of like it that God's just checking in a little bit, hey, it's going to be fine. I wouldn't mind if God showed up once in a while and said, "Hey, everything's going to be all right. I got you." And so, I don't know either why here and why right now, but I sort of like that depiction of God as just sort of reminding Abram that God is God and it's going to be okay.
I really like that, Bobby, because I think it's so funny when I'm reading. I get in this sort of weird cerebral place where I'm like, God has already said that, and nothing bad has happened. So why
Yeah.
would God say it again? When I think about my actual life of faith, I fall in and out of confidence all the time, and for sometimes for no particular reason. And so you're exactly right. Having this sort of ongoing, I'm still here, I've still got you. Avram's doing something hard. He
Yeah.
has left his family, his ancestral family, and is moving out into the world, and that is a hard thing every single day.
It's so interesting to me that, Abram's response is when God says, "Don't be afraid," the first thing I think of is Abram is feeling danger.
Yes.
And God is saying, it's you're going to be safe.
Yes.
But Abram's response is not about that. It's so interesting that Abram's not "Thank you, I'm glad that you're protecting me." He comes back at God in
Yes.
this really interesting way.
Yes.
And it's about not having any children. So, Abram, you're going to be fine. How can I be fine? I don't have any children. I'm assuming this is related to the promise back in Genesis 12. Do you read the children issue as being about God promising children in Genesis 12 or a more general anxiety?
I think you certainly can read it about the promise of children, but I think the bigger question for me is sort of why the promise of children was so important. And as I read the story of Avram this year, I'm almost thinking about Kohelet, thinking about he has amassed a lot of wealth, he is secure and safe, but he is getting to the point in his life where it's clear to him it doesn't matter. You get all the things that you think are going to make you feel secure.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if that's what Avram was thinking before, but I'll speak for myself. You think you're feeling secure, and then you realize it's not enough. And so Kohelet doesn't go into the importance of having children and all that stuff. That's not his emphasis. But I think the idea that you're looking for something more and you're looking for something that can continue beyond you, I don't know. For me, it somehow connects these two stories, these two parts of the Bible.
I like that way of thinking about it. When we were talking with the Bible Worm Collaborative, one of the things they were saying was, it was a little bit like, are children the be all and end all? And a little bit we live in an era when, it's a kind of a crazy world to bring children into. And so there are some people who for one reason or another don't have children or can't have children, other people who don't want to have children. And so the emphasis Abram puts here on children can be a little of a, I don't know, off-putting or distracting or something. you've sort of moved us slightly from children to something like legacy, or something about
Yeah.
something about your life that endures beyond yourself. I like that way of thinking about it. It seems like it gives more people a way of entering into this text
way
and
of entering the
relating to-
story if their heart's desire is not to have children.
Right.
Yeah.
I do think it's also connected back to Genesis 12 and the blessing in which God says that Abram will receive land and progeny.
Mm-hmm.
And so he does have this specific promise that God's going to do this thing for him
That's right.
that has not yet been done. And some time has passed. It's been a little while. Some things have happened. And Abram's still sort of waiting. And so in my mind, it's sort of the combination of he's getting older and he's wondering what his legacy is going to be. And also he has this promise from God that has not yet been fulfilled. And he's getting angsty about that. Like I'm ready for the next, I'm ready for the fulfillment of what has been promised to me. I think I read here too.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that.
The concern is that he's going to have to leave everything he owns to Eliezer, who is somebody in his household. The Hebrew there's a little confusing. CEB has it as Eliezer from Damascus. Some people have it as Domestic Eliezer as his name. But the salient point seems to be that he's not biologically a member of Abram's family. It's his, I don't know, the most important of his servants who's in charge of everything. That's the guy who's going to inherit. And this does not seem satisfying to Abram, that he's going to give it to somebody who's not actually his family member.
Well, I think it's worth remembering too that, well, at least the way I think about the biblical idea, the Hebrew Bible's idea of, I don't know if eternal life sounds a little too dramatic, but there's not as much conversation in the Jewish world and in the world of Hebrew Bible about sort of some kind of eternal life of the soul, or that this sort of individual, what happens to us individually that means that death is not final, that you find in some other tradition. There's some, but it's not as big of a thing. But I think there is really an idea that the immortality is cross-generational, that the life of the people lives between the generations. And so it feels like a death to not have a generation after you to pass on to.
Yeah. So this is like Abram's, this would be the end of him, basically. He has no children. All his wealth transfers to somebody else's family.
Yeah.
I think that's right. There's always, in the biblical text, there's often these curses that are like, you will plant vineyards, but you will not reap them. You will dig wells or build houses, but you will not live in them. And this is so this biblically seems like the tragedy when your life's work benefits somebody that doesn't have any real connection to you. And you could read this that way, like Abram's built all of this wealth. It's going to make a life for Eliezer. But what is that for Abram?
Yeah.
So in verse 4, God then redirects back. No, it's not going to be Eliezer. It's going to be your own child. And so, we get this drama in these texts from chapter 12 to chapter 21 about how's this promise that God made in chapter 12 going to come to be. And here's a step in it. We knew that there was going to be progeny of some sort. Now we get the more specific. It's going to be your own child, even though Abraham was 75 in the previous text. I'm not quite sure how old he is right now.
Yeah, but he's getting up there.
He's pretty, yes. And Sarah is, maybe more importantly, is also similar aged, and so beyond the age of childbearing. And so I'm just curious what you think of God's response to him here. Abraham's expressing this anxiety, and this is what God offers.
I mean, in some ways, it is the ultimate affirmation. It's a very clear and direct response to what Avram says. And he says, what you're worried about is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And it really requires a pretty big leap of faith. I don't know, willingness to believe something that, as far as you have seen in the way the world works, this is not the way the world works.
Yeah.
And so you have to be willing to believe that God can make some other kind of thing happen. But it is a very direct response to his worry.
It is. It's so interesting because, I mean, I have known how this story turns out for my whole life. And so but it seems to me that the promise in Genesis 12 was itself fairly clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Avram and Sarai are married. They're going to have a descendant.
Mm-hmm.
And the humans in this story keep complicating what seems pretty straightforward to me, that maybe it's going to be Eliezer, and then next it's going to be Hagar. They keep like trying to find ways within, as you're saying, within what seems humanly possible.
Mm-hmm.
They think, well, it can only happen in these ways because it couldn't happen in this miraculous way. And God is saying, no, there's going to be a miracle.
No, that's exactly right. They're using what they know, what they can see in the human world, and constantly trying to figure out how some muted version of what has been promised could sort of happen.
Right.
Yeah.
What makes that so tense in the biblical text is the delay in the fulfillment of the promise, right? If God had just said, you're going to have an heir, then bam, Sarah was pregnant, then that's not a very good story.
No, it's not. Not a good story.
But we get this sort of gap between the promise has been made and it's going to be fulfilled. We who have read the text know. But for the characters in the story, it felt like the long delay, and your head starts working on like, how can this work? And it's not going to. So there's something in this text that just seems really compelling to me about promises delayed, God's promises delayed, and the anxiety that can create for us. And for me, I think we a lot of the time we're living sort of in between. Like we're living in the Genesis 15 of life, not in the Genesis 21 of life when the promise actually comes to fruition.
Bobby, I was so struck reading this year by the little detail that I don't think I had particularly landed on in the past, but that God takes Avram outside.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, he has to take him outside to look at the heaven and count the stars, although I wouldn't necessarily have known he was inside before. But it's feeling to me more this year like, we were just saying you're so caught up in the human world, like the world as you sort of know it.
Yeah.
And you have to look in a different way. Like you have to get outside of the systems you have set up in your household in order to be able to see this bigger other possibility.
I love that, Amy. And I want to push it. I'll push you one step further, which is like the stars are out there every day.
Yes.
And so like if somebody's like, hey, Bobby, this thing that is going to happen for you, go outside and look at the stars. And I'm like, yada, yada. Yeah. Like I saw the stars yesterday.
Yes.
Like, come on.
Yes.
And so it's so interesting that the sign of the promise is something that has been there every day for all of Abram's life. So yes, get outside of your house, but also the promise is, I was going to say mundane, but stars are not at all mundane.
They're not, but just exactly as you're saying, Bobby, they're not mundane, but they're always there.
So it's not like, hey, there's going to be like a special star in the sky that's going
to... Right, it wasn't like a shooting star, or it wasn't like a plane that wrote Avram in the sky, or like, that would have been really cool.
So do you have a way of thinking about that? Like the sign of the promise is the stars.
Yeah. It's making me, I mentioned before we started talking about Bible that I am getting ready for this concert, and one of the songs we're singing is May I Suggest, which is a Red Molly song, I think. And one of the lines is, so the sort of point of the song is, may I suggest this is the best moment of your life, and sort of pointing out all the things that we don't see around us that are so great. But there's this one line that says, just turn your head and you'll begin to see the 1,000 reasons that were just beyond your sight. And I've really we've been talking a lot in my group about that line, like just turn your head. The thing was already there. It's not just appearing, but there is a kind of miraculousness or a real power in what we choose to give our attention to or what we're able to give
Yeah.
our attention to. And so to be able, I don't know, to be able to give your attention to the stars and see their miraculousness again, even though they're there all the time,
Yeah.
it is a different kind of miracle. It's not a burning bush, but it's, I don't know, it's quieter.
It's reminding me of our conversations that we had this summer about the creation texts. And I feel like you were often talking about how creation is miraculous and it's around us all the time.
Yeah.
And we lose track of the miraculousness of the world that we live in. And that's the way I love that way of reading this text, that, God has promised Abram something that seems impossible, but if you walk outside and you can look up and see that God has already done things that seem impossible.
No, I love that.
And so if God can do that, then surely God can do this.
I love that way of thinking about it.
This line in verse 6, it is enormously important in the Christian tradition. I imagine it is important in the Jewish tradition as well. The CEB translates, Abram trusted the Lord and the Lord recognized Abram's high moral character, which I do not really love. It is sometimes translated, Abram trusted the Lord and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. The Hebrew is chashav, something like God thought it to be righteousness or God considered it to be righteousness. Do you have thoughts about what that verse is trying to say?
You're right that Avram is seen as the sort of father of faith, the one who's willing to take things on faith. I think largely because of his action in Genesis 12, a little less because of this line, because he doesn't actually have to do anything. He just says, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
At this moment, I don't know if I can really back this up with the Hebrew, but thinking about the way you just described the sort of realizing the miracle of looking at the stars, I'm almost seeing this as like the God version of that. Like God sees this faith, this trust that Avram has in him that he had already demonstrated in Genesis 12, but he sees it, he newly sees it here. God, I'm using the masculine pronoun for God here. I'm out of practice, but God newly sees this willingness of Avram to say like, okay, I don't understand how this is going to happen, but okay.
It is so interesting that the narrator just tells us that Abram trusted the Lord, and we don't actually know what that looked like.
Yeah.
But he does seem to have some sort of like, he settles or he agrees or he relaxes. One of the things that I love about that is God here is receiving one sort of thing and considering it to be something that is slightly different. And the slightly different thing is righteousness, which is a kind of a loaded word in the Hebrew, tzedakah, which righteousness often feels like piousness when we use it in my tradition, but righteousness really means something more like being in right relationship with God and with humans or something like that, which then leads you to be worshipful and also to be ethical. But this sort of like this trusting, God receives that as a sign that Abram is a righteous person or that Abram is in right relationship with God. There's been something going on in these last couple of texts about things that are one way being received in a different way. I'm thinking about the serpent last week manipulating so that something that was said comes to mean something else, and that ends up being destructive or disruptive. Here it's God receiving something that is trust and saying, okay, I'm going to count this as righteousness. So taking something in a very positive way as a restoration of relationship. I don't quite know where that goes, but it seems like a thing that's showing up in these texts.
I really like that, these different things are sort of out there in the world, but then so much of it is in the proverbial eye of the beholder. Like, how do we actually understand that thing that has just been put out there?
Mm-hmm. I like this theologically because it's like God takes what Abram is able to give and accepts it as the thing that God needs, or something like that. And so you don't always have to get it exactly right, but God is willing to cover the gaps in what we're able to do.
Yeah.
This line is important in the Christian tradition, especially in Protestant Christianity, because it's one of the places where we see the idea that it's belief that God receives as righteousness, not our actions, which is important for Luther, which becomes important in the Christian tradition. Well, it becomes important to Paul, is really what it does, which then becomes important on down the line. I myself don't want to make like the word belief in our context is such a cognitive thing. Here, the word he'emin is more to trust, like to live one's life with confidence in God is more active than the translation belief to me.
No, I think that's really important. And again, like the fact that Avram has absolutely done things to act on this trust 100%. Already. Yeah, I like the translation trust. Hi, y'all. It's Amy, one of your friendly co-hosts, and I want to tell you why Bible Worm is important to me. There's a Jewish tradition that Torah study is best done with a partner, a Hevruta, we call it, someone who pushes you beyond where you would have gone on your own. Bobby was essentially my Hevruta for 10 years of grad school, and I've never found a thought partner quite like him. So when he asked if I wanted to read text together, there was no real thought process before I said yes. The decision to record this podcast the way we do was risky. We don't have a script. We don't pre-talk things. We are thinking together live. And it is my hope that precisely because of that, you feel invited to think along with us. Because everyone needs a Hevruta. And if you don't have one, I hope you will let us be yours. If this way of being in relationship to biblical text speaks to you the way it speaks to me, I hope you'll help sustain us through Patreon at whatever level makes sense for you. There are some nice perks if you need them. Liturgies, videos, monthly discussion groups. This year I've added some recordings of the chanting of these texts that you might hear in a synagogue. Or you can just support us to show your appreciation and help us know that this work matters. Thanks for listening and for supporting us however you can.
Okay, so that is the Narrative Lectionaries text for today. But the rest of this text is so interesting. I just want us to spend a little time with it. So I'm going to pick up in verse 7, and I think maybe we'll stop in 16. God said to Abram, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as your possession. But Abram said, Lord God, how do I know that I will actually possess it? He said, bring me a 3-year-old female calf, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a dove, and a young pigeon. He took all of these animals, split them in half, and laid the halves facing each other, but he didn't split the birds. When the vultures swooped down on the carcasses, Abram waved them off. After the sun set, Abram slept deeply. A terrifying and deep darkness settled over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, have no doubts that your descendants will live as immigrants in a land that isn't their own, where they will be oppressed slaves for 400 years. But after I punish the nation they serve, they will leave it with great wealth. As for you, you will join your ancestors in peace and be buried after a good long life. The 4th generation will return here, since the Amorites' wrongdoing won't have reached its peak until then. Okay, we're going to get the conclusion of this story here in a minute, but I just want to pause there. We've got a shift. In the first part of this text, we were talking about the promise of descendants. Mm-hmm. This shifts us to the promise of land. How do I know I'm actually going to receive the land? I'm going to ignore the animals for just a
Okay.
minute. They got split open.
Yeah.
The response that God gives in 13 is about, yes, land, but let me tell you what's going to happen in the 400 years in between, and it's not going to be pretty.
Mhm.
This thing that's happening here about like promises deferred, and it just seems like there's something this text is really working on. Can you talk about that sense that, I mean, Abram's getting what he's asking for. You're going to get the land, but then there's also this Egypt and slavery and all of these things. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's such an interesting answer to his question. How can I know that we're going to get the land? And then the answer is sort of, I'm going to give you a fuller story.
Yeah.
And part of that story is you, Avram, are not going to get the land. Like
Right.
this is not a short-term promise. It's not a
Yes.
short-term
That's so
situation
important,
here.
yeah.
And also, neither are you going to be with a generation that's going into slavery. Like you're not actually going to see any of this come to fruition.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things in this passage that are helping me see, helping readers see, maybe helping Avram see too, how complicated the promise is, and that it's not just like, I'll give you a cookie after you clean your room kind of
Right.
promise, you know? And so in this, I feel like we get two ways that complicate it. One of them is, there are a lot of Jewish interpreters who try to wrestle with like, why did this time of enslavement and oppression and, presence in a land that is not their own have to happen? Some of them come to the idea that this is all sort of part of their spiritual growth as a people and will lead them to understand things that they're going to need to understand before they can be a blessing to the people of all the world, which is what God's intention has been through the lineage of Avram. Maybe at this point, God is seeing that you can't just give people stuff and think that they're going to do the right thing with it. Not that the story doesn't get very complicated anyway, but it says here that they're going to come out of slavery with great wealth. And there are many streams of Jewish interpretation that see that as like spiritual wealth, not material wealth.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
I think the other piece that feels like it complicates this in important ways for me is that last part about the iniquity of the Amorites, which at first I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. I was just going to ignore that bit.
I mean, understandably, I think my best understanding is that by the Amorites, they mean the people who are in that land right now, the Canaanites, which is sort of, there are a couple of stories happening at the same time. Like there's a story for the descendants of Avram, but there's also a story for the Amorites. And part of the reason that they are kicked out of the land, according to this story, is because they have done something that merits that
Right.
punishment. And
Right.
so these two stories are unfolding at the same time. This is not only the story of Avram's descendants. It has to fit into this like very complicated Excel sheet, like a three-dimensional Excel sheet.
That is so helpful, Amy. So the story of this one people and the story of this other people have this complex relationship with one another, and so that the timing of things. So the text is kind of getting at the rise and fall of peoples and kingdoms and things. That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
You look like that's not what.
No.
Like
That is what I'm thinking. It's just, that this is all. Yes, I have made this promise, but it's not as straightforward as like I can just do it now.
Yeah. No, I love the way you're thinking about all of that, and especially just this idea that there is yet still struggle, even though the promise has been made. There is yet still struggle to come, and God can see it coming.
Yeah.
And whether it's purposeful or not,
Yeah.
to me that's a whole other question.
It's a whole other question.
See why
I know.
there's so much energy spent on it. If God already knows right here, then there must be some purpose. But some of the ways that I tend to read that is just like life is a struggle, and it's there's going to be struggle between here and there. But it's so helpful. I mean, because we've had in this first text the promise in Genesis 12, and then there's a struggle until the child is born. Now we have the promise of land, and then this, like, not just a few years of struggle, but a few centuries of struggle before this land promise is going to be fulfilled. Like that's like saying, we're going to fulfill whatever promise I made to you today in the year 2450. And like that hardly seems great. But that's what it is. Like the long-term view of God's promises.
Yes.
I think is really
here.
Here.
It's really interesting for me to think about the ways in which that would calm my own anxiety versus would not calm my own anxiety.
Yeah. So to say you're going to die peacefully, things are going to suck for your descendants for the next 4 centuries, but then they're going to be okay after that.
Yeah, well, like there is promise and there is covenant with God and there is relationship, potentially throughout that time.
Yeah.
But God's promise does not preclude suffering.
Yeah. That's important. That's so important. You talking about the Amorites was reminding me, do you remember when we were in graduate school, and I don't know who it was, maybe the Hillel, I guess. And they had Emory spelled out in Hebrew on their shirts.
Yes.
But Emory spelled out in Hebrew on shirts is Amorite.
Yes.
Which is like the terrible like Gentile sign of whatever.
It was
like
classic.
The heathens.
That was really classic. I wish I had bought one of those shirts.
Did you ever ask them if they? Surely somebody knew that, right?
It
had to be a joke.
They must have. Maybe they just thought it was funny. I don't know.
Yeah. It is a good joke, and there's very few people can look at a shirt written in Hebrew, realize the joke, and find it funny. So it's very inside.
That's true. Very inside. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So at this moment, also all of this conversation about the future in Egypt is taking place while Abraham is having a vision or a deep sleep. But before that, Abraham has been asked to cut up all these animals and lay them with their halves facing each other. So there's like a little, I don't know, it's making me think about like when a football team runs onto the football field and they come down and the band like forms a column and they run through there.
Yeah.
It's like that, except with heifers and goats cut in half.
Yeah.
We're going to get the conclusion of the story here in a minute, but can you talk to me about like why the dismembered animals?
I have not thought about that specific question in a good while. I mean, I think I learned at one point that if we want to look sort of for some historical root of like why, that's a really random thing to do.
Yeah.
That in the formation of ancient Near Eastern covenants, this kind of thing was sometimes done, maybe as a way to say or suggest, if you break this covenant, may this horrible dismembership. I like that. May this horrible thing happen to you. Is that how you would? I mean, if we're talking about like what is the ancient Near Eastern background of this specific act, does that sound?
That sounds right. The Hebrew expression to make a covenant is really to cut a covenant.
Yeah.
And that is how this often is understood, is that this sort of cutting up of the animals is a way of the people who are making the agreement saying, if I or if you break this covenant, then may we be like these animals that are dismembered here around us. And so it's a way of, it's like a handshake deal, but like a lot more serious than that, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe that's what's happening here, is that God and Abram are entering into a covenant in the way that people in that time period would have entered into a covenant.
Yeah.
The violence against animals here is always a little bit disturbing.
It is disturbing.
I mean, it's just kind of the world in which
yes,
this text comes from.
I think that's right. It is difficult for me to think of. Like, I was trying to sit this morning and think about the sort of gravitas that would be present in that space, or like the sense of liminality, or sort of like almost in a sensory way, what what it would be like, it's really hard for me not to get bogged down in the distress of it.
Yeah.
But it certainly is a powerful thing to do.
I mean, the words there, like in verse 12, after the sun had set, Abram slept deeply. That's the same word that for the sleep that Adam sleeps when the woman is created. But a terrifying and deep darkness settled over him. Like, your sense of like this would be discomfiting is exactly right. Like, this is not a peaceful moment for Abram. This is an intense thing that he's experiencing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pick up in verse 17. After the sun had set and darkness had deepened, a smoking vessel with a fiery flame passed between the split open animals. That day the Lord cut a covenant with Abram. To your descendants I give this land, from Egypt's river to the great Euphrates, together with the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So in verse 17, we have the sort of symbolic sealing of this covenant, which is some sort of smoking vessel with a fiery flame passing down through this little corridor of split open animals. Do you have thought about that image of sealing the covenant?
I mean, what I will say is that the particular images that are used, this fire and a smoking oven, remind me a little bit of the manifestations of God's presence that led the Israelites in the desert, the cloud by day and the fire by night. And I think in particular because the promise involves a lot of struggle and strife for the people, the idea that, I don't know, what it evokes for me is the idea that all these things will happen and God is present here at this covenant, and God will be present as this unfolds. And yes, there is this promise at the end of it, but it's not, for me, it's not just a promise like I'll meet you back here in 400 years.
Yeah.
It's
I love that.
I'll be here, but it's going to be rough.
I like that a lot, Amy, and it's pushing me back to think like, maybe these animals that are cut open here do have that covenant. I mean, I think they do have that covenant symbolism, but there is also maybe here a symbolism of the violence that is coming. And so very literally, this is God's presence in the midst of this violence, signifying this greater symbolic presence in the strife that is to come. I love that connection I love that connection.
Do you have other ways of thinking about that?
Well, if you go back to the covenant, sealing of a covenant, one of the ways this gets talked about is that you would expect two people making a covenant with each other to seal the covenant, the both of them, in between these animal pieces. But here we don't get that. We just get this representation of God, as you're saying, moving back and forth between the animals. And Avram seems to be asleep, having a vision off to the side. If you read it that way, then the covenant that God makes with Abram is sealed by God without Abram also having to take on the same vow. So God is saying, if I violate this covenant, may this happen to me. But Abram is not having to say the same thing. If you read it that way, then it's a one-way, unconditioned covenant that God has made with Abram and his descendants that doesn't require a similar commitment back.
Yeah.
And so the foundational covenant here is God's covenant, freely given, without expectation of similar response. Now, we do get responses later, right? Like conditions later, even in the next couple chapters with circumcision, and then we get the Mosaic covenant and so on. But those are all made within this greater context of God saying, I am committed to you, full stop. And then later it's, I'm committed to you. And so this is what that looks like for you to live your life,
Right.
But here it's, I'm committed to you. So I really like that image of a God who is willing to commit. And I mean, I don't know what it means for God to say, if I don't keep my covenant, may I be chopped up like a turtle dove or whatever. But God is taking on responsibility, but also investing God's very self
Yeah.
in this covenant. I just think that's a really beautiful image of what God is like.
I love that, Bobby. And I'm thinking about it connected to that line that you drew out about how God sort of understood or received Avram's trust as righteousness.
Yeah.
That moment of trust, of sensing Avram's trust, because Avram doesn't really
Mm.
say anything,
Mm-hmm.
is like, okay, like that was enough. I don't need a further promise. You don't have to walk between the pieces and bring a curse upon yourself if you don't do it. Like I
Yeah.
receive your trust
Oh, I like that. I like that.
and I will respond fully.
I really like that, connecting it back. I sort of have separated these two stories in my head, but I like this, seeing this as a response to that trust. I see your trust and I'm going to respond to it and commit myself to you. I love that connection. Amy, the land that is promised here is enormous. From
Mhm.
Egypt to the Euphrates. And then there are peoples named here. It's not entirely clear, because it's not the lands of, it's that I'm going to give you these people. So anyway, so there's an enormous plot of land that is already got inhabitants. And this is what is promised to Abram and his descendants. I'm just curious. I mean, there's a lot that one can wrestle with about that. I'm just curious where your head goes in terms of what that promise is.
That's a hard question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think I just would say that like biblical promises of land make me very uncomfortable as a modern person, especially in light of the fighting and violence and death that is swallowing up this land that is being described here, because people believe it to be theirs. People on all sides believe it to be theirs. And so I feel like I don't have an answer. I see it here. Like I see you in their text and I will hold you in my open palm, and I don't know how to compute it or what to do with it other than to see that it's there.
I appreciate that answer. That's such an honest answer about the complications of it. And, not just thinking about ancient people in that land, but also modern people and the land that you and I are on right now as we're talking in North America. Like, this is also land that has been possessed and dispossessed. And so I think we all need to just sort of see it there and wrestle. One of the things that I love in this text is that ambiguity. It's not, I'm going to give you their land. It's that I'm going to give you them. And if you hold your head just right, you can read that as God is giving you neighbors, right? Like the intention is not, I'm going to give you this place and they have to leave, but I'm going to bring you into a place where you can live among other people. Now, that's not the way the text is going to end up going, as we well know. But there's a moment in my reading, anyway, of possibility here that God is saying, I'm going to give you a home, and that home is going to be among others. And that's how your life is going to be. I mean, it's probably a wishful reading, but it is a reading nonetheless.
I'll take a wishful reading.
What you just said also remind you, and you say often when you see things in the biblical text that you wish weren't there, find them in your own world and figure out what you can do about it. And I think this text to me is a little bit like that. I mean, I don't know exactly how that plays out, but this little text serves as a reminder in all the different ways that land is always contested, and what role are we going to play for good in that.
Yeah.
So, Amy, that brings us to our time in our podcast where we think about going all the way to 15:1-6, which it's been a little while since we talked about that now. But all of Genesis chapter 15. and these promises of land and progeny and how they unfold. When you think about how that relates to our contemporary world and the communities that we live in, what are you pulling away from this text?
I am really feeling that, I drew out that detail that God brings Avram outside at some point to make this promise. And I'm thinking of how Avram was the one who left this land where he was living with his family and is willing to sort of go forth and the way that the story seems to continuously be in this sort of dance between security and safety, that we all want security and safety and protection and sense that we're stable. That's part of why we want land, right? That represents security and safety for us. And constantly asking us to step out of it in order to be able to see something different, in order to be able to allow something else to happen. And knowing that, I don't know, I guess I've come to believe that that is often how God works, and often it doesn't mean it won't be hard. Just because it is God's idea for you or God's plan for Avram, or however we want to talk about it, doesn't mean it's going to be smooth sailing. But we really over and over and over again have to keep going outside. We have to keep leaving the space where we feel really comfortable and secure in order to even consider, in order to have access to anything in that bigger plan. It's kind of a big ask for humans. We're just little creatures.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's what feels alive to me this year reading this text, is that the balancing of all those different things in the story.
That's really lovely, Amy. I'm especially loving the stepping outside of familiar spaces or our safe spaces to encounter the glory of what is, as a reminder. I think I'm somewhere similar with this text. I have a lot of foreboding in my soul right now. I think that may be the case for lots of us. Just we're headed into a fall that I think just has lots of unknowns, especially here in the US, and a world that has lots of complications, even here and now and everywhere. And I think it's easy to lose track of God's promises in that context, and to think maybe the promises have failed, or maybe the promises weren't real, or maybe the promises are forgotten in the past. And in both parts of this text, there's a deferral of the promise before it comes to fruition. The promise of progeny, there's going to be one child at the end of Abram's life, but there's not going to be a sky full of children until much later. It's way down the line. In the second promise of land, there is explicitly said it's going to be painful for 400 years. But that doesn't mean the promise failed. It means there's going to be some pain before the promise comes to fruition. And so to me, that's helping me, I think, a little bit, at least in the long term, to say there are promises and that we do believe those promises. And so we have to go through what we go through, and those promises yet still are true. That brings me then back to line 6, right? Abram trusted, and God recognized it as righteousness, or however we want to translate that. And so the calling of this text is to trust in the middle of all of that the promises hold, and to live your life today and tomorrow and the next day in light of the promise, not in light of the things that make you doubt the promise. I mean, that's a huge ask too. I'm not pretending that it isn't, but if you just think, well, I wake up this morning and I say, okay, I'm going to trust the promise today, and we do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Then God comes through in the end.
Yeah. It's really a long game. It's really a long game.
All right, Amy. Well, next week we're going to be in Genesis 37 and a little bit in Genesis 50. We're in the Joseph story at the end of Genesis, which also has the long game theme going on there. So we'll talk about that next week. It's been great talking to you. I appreciate your insights about this text.
Yeah, me too. It's been fun.
How's your little bug on the floor there?
He's thriving, but he's still under the cup. He's running around.
Have to figure out how to get him back out into the world.
Oh, yeah. I have a system. Don't worry. There are a lot of these bugs in Atlanta, as you remember, I'm sure. So,
I do remember, yeah.
Yeah, I just have to get a properly sized card to slip under the cup.
Oh, right on. That's a good plan. All right, well, I hope that goes well.
Thank you.
give the bug my best.
I will.
See you next time.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Join us next time when we'll be reading the story of Joseph and his brothers as told in Genesis 37 and 50. Until then, keep on digging.